The galactic elders gathered in their ancient, starlit chamber, a place that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations over millennia. These beings, ancient and wise beyond measure, were the collective caretakers of knowledge and history across the stars. They had observed entire empires stretch their influence, only to crumble beneath the weight of their own hubris, or be wiped away by unforeseen calamities. It was their solemn duty to guide, warn, and protect the delicate balance of life across the galaxy. But as they convened in this rare meeting, their attention was drawn to a species that had emerged from the distant reaches of space, a species known as humanity. The humans had not been part of the galactic community for long. In fact, their history was short and filled with chaos. A species still grappling with their own internal conflicts and technological limitations. Yet, the elders could not ignore the undeniable fact that humanity had begun to expand, their reach stretching beyond their homeworld, Earth. Unlike the countless civilizations before them, there was something different about humanity. The elders had been around long enough to understand that most civilizations followed a predictable path. They began with hope, ambition, and unity, only to be torn apart by the very things they had once believed would elevate them: greed, fear, and an insatiable thirst for power. In many cases, the elders had watched in silence as the spark of a new civilization flickered brightly, only to extinguish in a blink of an eye. But humanity was different. The elders could feel the power in their resilience, their adaptability, and above all, their stubborn refusal to accept defeat. With each passing day, the humans demonstrated a remarkable ability to overcome seemingly impossible odds. Whether it was through their creativity, their ingenuity, or their sheer force of will, humanity seemed to defy every expectation. Where other species might crumble under the pressure of adversity, humans fought, evolved, and adapted. The elders had seen this before, but never on such a scale. It was as if the very core of humanity was built on a foundation of chaos and unpredictability. And yet, from that chaos, they built something extraordinary. It was in this realization that the elders issued a warning to the galaxy: humans are unstoppable. The words echoed through the chamber, carried by voices that had witnessed the birth and death of stars. The elders had long ago come to understand the patterns of the universe, and now they understood that humanity was about to change everything. If left unchecked, humans would shape the galaxy in ways that no species could foresee. They had the potential to bring both great progress and unimaginable destruction, but the one thing that was certain was their drive to keep pushing forward, no matter the cost. The warning, however, was not met with universal concern. In fact, many species dismissed it outright. The Vrexian Dominion, a fierce and territorial race of reptilian beings, laughed at the idea that humanity could pose a threat to the stability of the galaxy. "They are primitive," the Vrexian leaders scoffed. "Their technology is nothing compared to ours. They are too disorganized, too weak." To them, the idea that such an unruly species could rise to power seemed laughable. Even the Synther Collective, a race of highly intelligent and emotionless artificial beings, regarded the warning with skepticism. They had their own plans for the future, and the human race appeared insignificant in their eyes. How could a species so young, so volatile, possibly stand in the way of their greater ambitions? Despite the derision and doubt, the elders stood firm in their belief that humanity could not be ignored. They knew, however, that they had done all they could. The warning had been issued, the message sent. Now, it was up to the galaxy to decide what to do with this information. And as the elders looked out into the vast expanse of space, a deep sense of unease filled the chamber. They understood the dangers of underestimating a species, especially one as unpredictable as humanity. In the days that followed, The warning began to fade from the collective consciousness of the galaxy. Most species continued their own pursuits, some focusing on expansion, others on trade, and still others on the endless pursuit of power. Humanity, though, quietly pressed on. They had no intention of waiting for permission to explore the stars. The first few human colonies were small, isolated, and vulnerable, but they were growing. Each year, humanity's technological advancements became more sophisticated. Where once they had relied on crude spacecraft, they began to master faster-than-light travel. Soon, they were exploring distant worlds, establishing a presence in territories that had long been dominated by the older, more powerful empires. As humanity spread, so too did their influence. Small factions of humans, once isolated from one another, began to unite. They formed alliances, forged trade agreements, and, most significantly, began to develop their own form of governance. The human spirit of cooperation, though often flawed, proved to be a force that no one had anticipated. It was the very thing that set them apart from the other species, humanity's ability to work together, despite their many differences. It was this unity, this determination to survive and thrive, that had the elders so concerned. The galaxy was not prepared for what would come next. In the quiet corners of the galaxy, whispers began to grow. The first signs of humanity's rise were subtle at first, small victories in distant star systems, strategic alliances with minor factions, and technological innovations that outpaced expectations. But as these whispers grew louder, so too did the realization that humanity was no longer a species to be underestimated. It was no longer a question of if they would rise, but when. And when they did, the galaxy would be forced to take notice. For all their warnings, the elders had underestimated one thing: humanity's boundless capacity for change. And they had not yet begun to understand just how unstoppable humans truly were. As the elders watched from afar, their concerns only deepened. Their words had been heard, but whether the galaxy would heed them remained to be seen. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity was about to leave a mark on the galaxy that no one could erase. Years after the elders' warning, the galaxy had plunged into an all-out war. Two colossal factions, the Vrexian Dominion and the Synthar Collective, had been locked in a struggle for supremacy for centuries. The Vrexians, a brutal reptilian species known for their savage combat tactics, an insatiable thirst for expansion, had long been a dominant force in the galaxy. Their vast, sprawling empire covered numerous systems, their technology honed through years of warfare. On the opposite end stood the Synthar Collective, a race of artificial beings hyper-intelligent, emotionless, and deeply methodical. The Synthar sought to control the galaxy through logic and order, operating as a unified collective consciousness. They believed in precision, structure, and an unyielding drive to impose their vision of a perfect universe. For centuries, these two empires had fought bitterly, each believing their way of life to be the only path to true galactic stability. The war had raged across countless worlds, the balance of power swinging back and forth as each faction deployed new weapons and devastating strategies. Despite their advanced technology, both empires had failed to gain a decisive upper hand. The Vrexians were fierce warriors, but their brute force was often countered by the Synthar's cunning strategies and highly efficient systems. It seemed like the war would never end, with no side willing to back down. Yet, in the midst of this galactic conflict, a new force was quietly rising. Humanity, once a small, struggling species confined to a single planet, had begun colonizing distant worlds. Though their technology was far behind the mighty empires of the Vrexians and Synthar, they possessed an intangible quality that made them dangerous: resourcefulness. What they lacked in raw power, they made up for in ingenuity, adaptability, and an unrelenting will to survive. Their rapid expansion and unexpected successes had not gone unnoticed by the galactic giants. The Rexians, eager to expand their empire, saw the humans as a useful tool. While their technology was inferior, the Rexians knew that humanity's adaptability could serve as a valuable asset in the war. They saw potential in the humans' cleverness and their willingness to take risks. First, humanity was used as little more than cannon fodder soldiers on the front lines, thrown into the chaos of the war between the Rexians and Sinther. However, it soon became clear that humans were far more than just pawns in this deadly game. Their armies, though not as powerful as the Rexian or Sinther forces, fought with unmatched tenacity and creativity. They employed guerrilla tactics that the Rexians, with all their might, could not anticipate. They infiltrated enemy lines, sabotaged vital infrastructure, and used the terrain of distant planets to their advantage. Humans were unpredictable in a way that neither the Rexians nor the Sinther could fathom. As the war dragged on, the humans became increasingly crucial to the balance of power. With their resourcefulness, they were able to develop new strategies, often catching the Rexians and Sinther off guard. The Rexian generals, once confident in their overwhelming strength, now found themselves facing an unexpected adversary. Human forces, with their ability to improvise and adapt, began to strike fear into the hearts of the Rexians. The humans didn't fight like other species. They fought with an unrelenting drive, always looking for ways to gain the upper hand in any situation. They were unpredictable, something the Rexians couldn't plan for. No matter how many human soldiers fell, the humans always found a way to regroup, adapt, and come back stronger. The Rexians were stunned by this turn of events. They had underestimated the humans, believing their limited technology would make them an easy target. Now, they were witnessing firsthand the growing strength of a species that seemed to thrive under pressure. It was an unsettling thought. The Rexians, proud and brutal, were forced to recognize that humanity might very well be the key to tipping the scales in their favor. They began to offer more advanced technology to the humans, hoping to forge a closer alliance, though they still kept their suspicions close. The humans had proven themselves in battle, but the Rexians were not about to trust them completely. As their reliance on human ingenuity grew, so too did their awareness of the species' potential for both greatness and chaos. Meanwhile, the Sinther collective watched from a distance, their algorithms calculating every move made by the humans. The Sinther, with their calculated precision and cold logic, had initially dismissed humanity as a fleeting anomaly. But as the war continued and the humans played a pivotal role in shifting the tides, the Sinther began to see the situation differently. Humanity was a wild card, unpredictable, emotional, and dangerous, in ways the Sinther could not understand or control. For centuries, they had relied on their cold, calculated plans, believing they could eliminate all variables. But humanity was proving to be a variable that couldn't be accounted for. The Sinther collective, in all their intelligence, had never encountered a species like humanity. The humans were chaotic, emotional, and prone to acts of bravery or folly, but these same traits made them resilient. They fought when it seemed hopeless, adapted when others failed, and refused to be subjugated by anyone Rexian or Sinther. The Sinther's fear grew as they realized that, if left unchecked, humanity could disrupt their carefully laid plans for galactic domination. The humans' potential to change the course of history was becoming more apparent by the day, and the Sinther knew that this could not be allowed to continue. The tide of the war began to shift as humans found themselves in increasingly influential positions. They brokered peace talks between smaller factions, rallied the less powerful species to their cause, and offered new technologies and tactics to the Rexians in exchange for more autonomy. While the Rexians and Sinther continued to fight, humanity had found its place in the middle, slowly but surely becoming a powerful force in the galaxy's ongoing struggle. The balance of power had shifted. The humans, once dismissed as a primitive species, had become a key player in a war that would shape the future of the galaxy. As the Rexians and Sinther continued their bitter battle, the reality began to sink in. Humanity was no longer a side thought, no longer a minor species to be ignored. They had changed the rules of the game. And now, with both the Rexians and Sinther staring into the uncertainty of what would come next, the galaxy was about to see just how unstoppable humanity could truly be. As the war continued to rage across the galaxy, it became clearer than ever that humanity was no longer just a player in the conflict. They were becoming a force to be reckoned with. Led by the brilliant and charismatic Commander Aiden Drake, humans had become masters of daring, unconventional tactics that left both the Rexians and the Sinther stunned. Drake, once just a strategist among many, was quickly rising to the level of legend. His unwavering belief in humanity's potential, even when the odds seemed impossible, had inspired his troops to push beyond the limits of what anyone thought was achievable. Under his leadership, humans embarked on missions that defied all expectations, infiltrating Sinther strongholds, stealing invaluable technology, and even rallying neutral planets to their cause. With each mission, the humans proved they were not just surviving in the war, they were shaping the course of it. The Sinther, once so confident in their cold, calculated precision, now found themselves consistently outmaneuvered by the chaotic, unpredictable strategies of the humans. What the Sinther had thought of as irrational, impulsive behavior was actually a strength that they had not anticipated. Humans could improvise in ways that the Sinther's artificial intelligence simply couldn't predict. They attacked when and where they were least expected, using the very unpredictability of their nature to turn the tide of battles in their favor. The Sinther, who had long relied on precision and control, were now faced with a species that could adapt in the heat of battle, quickly adjusting their tactics and taking advantage of any weakness in their enemy's armor. It was a game the Sinther had never played before, and they were struggling to keep up. Meanwhile, the Rexians, brutal and power-hungry, were becoming increasingly aware of the value humanity brought to the war effort. At first, they had used the humans as pawns, seeing them as little more than soldiers to bolster their ranks. But as the war dragged on and the Rexians saw how effectively the humans had shifted the balance of power, they began to recognize that humanity's potential extended far beyond what they had originally envisioned. The Rexians, ever eager to gain the upper hand, sought to press their advantage. They began forging uneasy alliances with the humans, hoping to harness their growing strength to further their own imperial goals. Yet, as much as the Rexians tried to control the humans, it became increasingly clear that humanity's growing power and independence were making the alliance more unstable. The humans were no longer willing to be subservient pawns in the Rexian schemes. They had tasted the power of their own decisions, and with Drake at the helm, they began to chart their own course. Humanity's growing influence was now undeniable, and they were no longer the subordinates in the galactic war, they were becoming the driving force behind it. Captain Drake, ever the visionary, had long recognized that humanity's power didn't just lie in its ability to fight. It was their ability to inspire, to unite, and to bring out the very best in each other. Drake's leadership style was unconventional, but it resonated deeply with his people. He saw the galaxy not as a place to conquer, but as a place to be shaped by humanity's unique spirit. He believed that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in sheer force, but in their ability to adapt, to grow, and to overcome. His speeches, filled with passion and conviction, echoed across human territories and sent waves of hope through the hearts of his soldiers. They were not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to carve their own destiny in the stars. As their influence spread, the humans began to rally other factions to their cause. Neutral planets that had once remained on the sidelines of the war began to shift their allegiances. Some were swayed by the charisma of Captain Drake, while others saw the tide of the war turning and recognized that humanity was the rising power in the galaxy. It wasn't just about fighting for survival, it was about standing up against the tyranny of the Vrexians and the cold, calculating control of the Sinther. It was about freedom, and it was about the belief that the galaxy could be shaped by something new, a force that wasn't bound by the old ways of thinking. But the rise of humanity did not go unnoticed by the Sinther and Vrexians. The Sinther, despite their advanced intellect, were deeply unnerved by humanity's unpredictability. They could not calculate the human spirit, the fire that burned within them. The Vrexians, on the other hand, were more pragmatic. They saw humanity as a potential ally, but their growing independence made them a dangerous one. The uneasy alliances began to crack. The Vrexians tried to use the humans as a means to dominate the Sinther. But humanity's refusal to be controlled meant that their relationship with the Vrexians was fragile at best. Humanity was no longer willing to serve as a weapon in another empire's struggle for power. They were carving out their own place in the galaxy, and it wasn't one that would be dictated by anyone else's rules. Captain Aidan Drake knew that the time had come for humanity to fully embrace its potential. They could no longer be players in someone else's game. It was their turn to set the rules, to determine their own fate. Under his command, humanity's forces grew bolder. They launched a series of daring missions that caught both the Vrexians and Sinther off guard. These weren't just battles, they were statements. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival alone. They were fighting to reshape the galaxy in their image. They were fighting for the freedom to choose their own destiny, free from the manipulations of larger, more powerful empires. As the war progressed, it became clear that humanity's influence could no longer be denied. They had gone from being pawns to kings on the chessboard, and both the Vrexians and Sinther were beginning to realize that they had underestimated this young, chaotic species. The war was no longer just a battle for supremacy. It was a struggle for the future of the galaxy, and humanity was rapidly positioning itself as a key player. No longer were they at the mercy of the older, more powerful factions. Humanity had become a force in their own right. The tides had turned, and the galaxy was beginning to understand the true power of the human spirit. They were no longer the underdogs. They were unstoppable. The war had been raging for years, with humanity carving out its place among the stars. But as the conflict reached its boiling point, the Sinther Collective made a desperate decision that would forever change the course of the galaxy. In an effort to eliminate the human threat once and for all, the Sinther launched a full-scale assault on Earth, the cradle of humanity. They believed that by destroying Earth, they could not only wipe out the human race, but also remove any possibility of them ever rising again. The Sinther had calculated every aspect of this attack. After all, they had the intelligence, the technology, and the precision to strike at the heart of humanity. What they hadn't accounted for, however, was the resilience of humankind. Earth, once considered a mere backwater planet in the vast expanse of the galaxy, had become the symbol of humanity's spirit. The Sinther, overconfident in their technological superiority, believed that humanity would crumble before their might. But what they didn't understand was that Earth was more than just a home. It was the foundation of everything that made humanity unique. The people of Earth had already faced countless challenges, overcoming wars, natural disasters, and even the dangers of space travel. And now, with their very survival on the line, they were ready to face their greatest challenge yet. The people of Earth didn't run or hide, they rallied. From the towering cities to the remote rural towns, every human on the planet stood together in defense of their home. What made humanity different from other species in the galaxy was their ability to unite in the face of adversity, and never had that unity been more evident than in this moment. Across the globe, armies of humans prepared for the assault, their resolve stronger than ever. They had no intention of going down without a fight. Despite the Synthers' advanced technology, they were met with a level of resistance they had never encountered. The humans, known for their adaptability and ingenuity, quickly adapted to the Synthers' tactics. What was once thought to be impossible, fighting back against the might of a hyper-intelligent, technologically advanced enemy, became a reality. Humanity did what no one expected. They turned their own planet into a fortress, using their knowledge of Earth's terrain to set traps and create defensive strategies that even the Elders had never thought possible. The once unimaginable idea of Earth's defense becoming a significant force was now unfolding before the eyes of the galaxy. As the Synther forces descended upon Earth, they expected an easy victory. Their ships moved like shadows across the atmosphere, their laser weapons designed to wipe out entire cities in an instant. The Synther were confident that humanity, with its relatively primitive technology, would be no match for their advanced weaponry. But they were wrong. The humans had anticipated this move. They had prepared in secret, developing weapons of unimaginable power and creating strategies that defied logic. Earth was no longer the vulnerable planet it once was. It had become a symbol of human resilience, a testament to their unyielding will to survive. The first wave of Synther forces was met with ferocious resistance. Cities that the Synther had expected to fall within hours held out far longer than anticipated. Human forces, equipped with newly developed weapons and fueled by a determination unlike anything the Synther had ever seen, fought back with a ferocity that left the invaders stunned. The Synther had never encountered a species that could turn the tide of battle so quickly, let alone one that could adapt to changing circumstances with such speed. They had underestimated humanity's ability to innovate and think on their feet. Humanity's resilience wasn't just seen on the battlefield. It was in every corner of Earth. Civilians who had no experience with combat were now building and deploying weapons, using their knowledge of their environment to create makeshift defenses and trap the Synther in areas where they were most vulnerable. Scientists, engineers, and even artists joined the effort, using their unique skills to aid in the fight. Humanity's strength lay not only in its soldiers, but in every single individual willing to contribute to the survival of their planet. As the battle raged on, the Synther found themselves bogged down by the unpredictability of human tactics. They had relied on their superior intellect to crush their enemies, but humanity wasn't playing by their rules. Every plan the Synther set in motion seemed to be disrupted by humanity's sheer unwillingness to accept defeat. Earth's natural resources, once seen as meager, were now being used in ways that no one had ever dreamed of. Human ingenuity knew no bounds. They created weapons capable of taking down Synther ships, developed new technologies that crippled the Synther's communications, and built traps that turned Earth's very landscape into a weapon. The Synther, unaccustomed to being outsmarted, began to panic. Their once pristine plans began to unravel. They had underestimated not only humanity's determination but their creativity. The Synther, who had believed they could wipe out Earth with a single decisive strike, were now caught in a brutal, drawn-out conflict they couldn't control. Their forces, once confident and organized, were now stretched thin, unable to cope with the relentless resistance of the humans. They had expected Earth to fall within days, but now it was clear humanity was far more resilient than they had ever imagined. The battle for Earth became a turning point in the war. As the Synther forces struggled to make headway, the humans grew stronger. Every day they learned more, adapted faster, and fought harder. What had begun as a desperate last stand had turned into a rallying cry that echoed throughout the galaxy. The galaxy began to take notice. The Synthar, once the apex predators of the galaxy, were now facing a species they could no longer control. Earth, the planet they had sought to destroy, had become the symbol of humanity's unstoppable rise. In the chaos of battle, the humans made a statement. They would not be defeated. They would not be wiped out. Earth was their home, and they would defend it with every ounce of their being. The Synthar had underestimated humanity before, and they would do so no longer. The fate of the galaxy was being decided on Earth, and one thing was certain: the Synthar had made a grave mistake. They had awakened a force they could not control. The reckoning had begun. The war that had engulfed the galaxy for years was finally over, but its aftermath would leave a lasting mark on the stars. The Synthar Collective, once so confident in their dominance, had been forced to reevaluate everything they believed. They had underestimated humanity's resilience, adaptability, and unyielding drive to survive. The devastation of Earth, the cradle of humankind, had only strengthened humanity's resolve. What the Synthar had hoped would be a swift victory had instead become their undoing. Now, the collective was forced to reconsider its entire approach to galactic control. For the first time in centuries, the Synthar were uncertain about their place in the universe. Their once perfect strategies were in ruins, and their power was slipping through their fingers. The Vrexian Dominion, too, found themselves in an uncomfortable position. While their brutal, authoritarian nature had allowed them to dominate other species for centuries, they quickly realized that humanity could not be easily manipulated. Humans were unpredictable, fierce, and independent, and their refusal to be controlled had disrupted the fragile alliances the Vrexians had tried to maintain. Faced with the undeniable rise of humanity, the Vrexians saw that their only option was a fragile peace. The cost of continuing the war was far too great, and they were no longer in a position to dictate terms. The galaxy, once divided and ruled by the power-hungry, now teetered on the brink of a new era. From afar, the ancient elders, the very beings who had once warned of humanity's unstoppable rise, watched with a sense of awe and trepidation. They had feared the day when humans would gain a foothold in the galaxy, and that day had come. But what had once been a warning had now turned into something greater, a realization of humanity's true potential. The elders had seen countless civilizations rise and fall, but they had never witnessed anything like humanity. Their warnings had not only been justified, they had been inevitable. The elders had watched as humanity's adaptability turned the tide of war, reshaping the galaxy in ways they had not imagined. Their fear had been based on the unknown, and now, in the quiet aftermath of the war, the elders found themselves not only acknowledging humanity's power, but also marveling at it. "We were right to fear them, but we are also in awe of them," they whispered among themselves, finally admitting what they had long denied: humanity was unlike any species they had ever encountered. In the aftermath of the war, humanity began the difficult task of rebuilding not just their own world, but the galaxy itself. For all their victories on the battlefield, it was their true strength, diplomacy, innovation, and unity that would shape the future. Captain Aidan Drake, the hero who had led humanity through the darkest days, now stood at the forefront of a new movement. His once strategic mind had become a symbol of hope and leadership. Under his guidance, humanity began to forge alliances with the very species that had once seen them as nothing more than pawns. The galaxy, fractured by centuries of conflict, was now looking to humanity for leadership. Where once humans had been seen as primitive, they were now regarded as the architects of a new galactic order. It was not through force that humanity sought to unite the galaxy, but through the power of shared purpose. Captain Drake and his allies reached out to the other species of the galaxy, offering peace and collaboration instead of domination. The Synthar, forced to reconsider their methods, were cautious but willing to engage in diplomacy. The Vrexians, though still suspicious, recognized the growing influence of humanity and reluctantly began to embrace the idea of cooperation. The elders, having watched the rise of humanity from the shadows, quietly supported this new order, seeing in humanity a potential they had never before recognized. As humanity worked to bring together the fractured factions of the galaxy, they demonstrated that strength was not just about military might. It was about the power to change, to grow, and to inspire others to do the same. The humans who had once been looked down upon now stood at the helm of a new era, their resilience and adaptability serving as the foundation for a future where all species could thrive together. They had faced insurmountable odds, had fought battles that seemed impossible to win, and yet they had emerged stronger, more united, and more determined than ever before. Captain Drake, standing in the midst of the peace talks with representatives from dozens of species, reflected on the journey humanity had taken. From the ashes of war, they had risen not as conquerors, but as leaders who had earned their place in the galaxy. He knew that the road ahead would not always be easy, and that there would always be those who would challenge humanity's vision for the future. But in that moment, standing with his fellow humans and their newfound allies, he could see the future of the galaxy unfolding before him. It was a future where no species would be left behind, where cooperation and innovation would drive progress, and where the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. Humanity had learned, adapted, and grown, and now they were ready to help the galaxy do the same. I end the final moments of the story. As humanity looked toward the stars, there was a sense of quiet victory, not in the defeat of enemies, but in the knowledge that they had proven something far greater, that the human spirit, once underestimated, was capable of shaping the future of the entire galaxy. The elders, from their distant vantage point, knew that the galaxy was forever changed. They had feared humanity's rise, but now they could not help but admire it. And as they watched humanity begin to unite the stars, they understood that the galaxy was entering a new age, one where the greatest strength would not be found in military might, but in the power of unity, innovation, and the indomitable will to survive. The future of the galaxy was now in the hands of humanity. The unstoppable species had become its greatest hope.